I am a courier. As a result, I've seen a lot of things across this wasteland, across America. I've met a lot of people, helped some, hurt others, but mostly I've just listened. Listened to stories about survival, stories about tragedy, but also about love. Stories about life and stories about death. But more than anything else, stories about war. And war never changes. On June 25th, 2020, the world was blessed, or cursed, depending on who you ask, with the arrival of one of its best and brightest, Robert Edwin House. A veritable genius who would go on to shape the future of not just the civilized, pre-war world, but also attempt to shape the future of the wasteland hundreds of years after the world was consumed by nuclear fire. House was born somewhere either in or nearby the city that he would develop a passionate love for, Las Vegas, Nevada. Just 1 month before his birth, his father would establish the H&H Tools Company. And just 2 years after that, both Mr. and Mrs. House would be killed in an accident when their autogyro was struck by lightning. As a result of the elder House's death, his eldest son, Anthony, would take over the company, meaning Anthony was at least 18 in 2022, while his much younger half-brother Robert was only 2. The details of Robert's home life, the circumstances surrounding his father's presumed remarriage, or exactly how much older Anthony was than him, all remain a mystery. But the early death of their parents would prevent neither of the House siblings from attempting to see their dreams fulfilled. Anthony through their father's company, and Robert through his own sheer determination and exceptional intelligence. This intelligence, which Robert clearly demonstrated at a very young age, may have been the primary cause of Anthony House's intense jealousy. Jealousy so toxic, in fact, that Anthony would intentionally cut Robert out of the family inheritance, and thus any ownership of their father's former company. And although Anthony would lead the H&H Tools Company for several years, and keep them in relatively good standing, he would be well aware of his brother's success despite his attempts to undermine him. For Robert would manage to achieve attendance at one of the most prestigious and well-respected educational facilities in the world, the Commonwealth Institute for Technology. And then, on his 22nd birthday, June 25th, 2042, he would establish his own company, Robco, which would go on to become one of the most profitable and successful corporations on planet Earth, right alongside the likes of entities like Poseidon Energy, West Tech, and Repcon. By House's 30th birthday in 2050, he had apparently amassed a fortune of at least $30 billion. A technical genius, and among the most gifted natural businessmen on the planet, House would propel his company to heights his brother and father could only have dreamed of, becoming world famous and rich beyond his wildest dreams, and owning a major stake in numerous large corporations, like the Lucky 38 Hotel and Casino on Las Vegas Boulevard, and even his father's company, H&H Tools, which he otherwise would have inherited. In fact, Robert's attempt at a hostile takeover of H&H Tools seemed to result in Anthony House's rapid mental deterioration, or at the very least, exacerbated the elder House brothers' eccentric tendencies. But it wasn't only Anthony with eccentric tendencies, if the tabloid journals of the time were anything to go off of. Robert's own strange habits, particularly where his love life was concerned, were something that was often brought up in sensationalist publications from the pre-war times, at the height of Robert's international celebrity. He was rumored to have an affinity, sexual or otherwise, for scanning the brains of the women he was courting, voluntarily of course, while also asking them to try on a variety of different outfits. Who could really say what was true though? The papers certainly did love to talk. But brain scanning as a hobby may not have been too far off given House's technical and mathematical genius by most accounts. He would spend an unhealthy amount of time dedicated to trying to use math and binary computational logic to predict the future in broad strokes. By 2065, House had become certain that nuclear war was not only likely, but inevitable within the next 15 years. Whether it be a nation finally hitting that big red button, or one of the planet's just as eager for self-destruction corporations, his many rivals, he knew that too many people were huddled around that big international poker table where everyone is cheating. Someone was bound to push it eventually, either accidentally or on purpose. While he would continue to accomplish a great deal in the worlds of technology and finance through his company Robco, more relevantly to Robert House the man was what he did in the years immediately preceding the end of the world. What did he do? Well, as one does, he made himself immortal. Convinced the end was nigh, and now living almost exclusively from his private suite within the Lucky 38 Hotel, House spent the last years before the war ensuring that both he and the city he called home, which was so personally important to him, survived the apocalypse. He set up numerous countermeasures, presumably in relative secret, with the aim of initially disabling any warheads headed for the city, but also planning for the contingency of some slipping through by setting up laser cannons atop the city's tallest building, which just so happened to also be where he lived. These countermeasures, however, were reliant on a software upgrade. An upgrade tied to a single, very powerful chip printed in Sunnyvale, California, at enormous expense to Robert on October 22nd, 2077. The chip was to be delivered by courier the next day on October 23rd, 2077. Most critically, though, Robert House prepared for not only his city to survive the nuclear apocalypse, but also himself well into the future. And so, at some unknown point, perhaps using either secret technology he had himself developed, or perhaps borrowing schematics from the Big Mountain Research Facility in the Southwest Commonwealth, but whatever the case, House had used an unknown procedure aided by robotics to place his physical body, enhanced with cybernetics and augmentations, inside of a life support device deep inside of the Lucky 38 Hotel and Casino, guarded by his personal army of Robco Securitrons, and sealed within a normally inaccessible section of the tower. Robert House the man vanished from the world, but the world didn't last very long after his departure. When blaring civil defense sirens heralded mankind's doom on October 23, 2077, the citizens of Las Vegas bore witness to an astonishing spectacle. Huge laser cannons unfurled from secret housings in the roof of the Lucky 38 Casino and Hoover Dam's intake towers, and began spitting blasts of green fire into the sky, destroying warhead after warhead and sparing Las Vegas's urban center and the dam from direct hits. Citizens filled the streets and cheered. And then they died horribly from the lethal fallout that blew in from the dozens of warheads that had detonated around Las Vegas. Though Mr. House's missile defense grid performed admirably, the Great War was in actuality the day of his greatest setback. Having spent decades preparing for the statistical inevitability of atomic war, House found himself forced to protect Las Vegas with buggy software. Had the Great War occurred even 24 hours later, House would have received and installed Mark II of his defense system's operating software. Instead, the disk containing the upgrade, which had just passed quality assurance, was buried in the irradiated ruins of the Sunnyvale, California lab where it was developed. And so, in the chaos of the Great War, the Platinum chip was lost. House's existing laser and missile defense systems would indeed manage to shoot down many of the 77 warheads which targeted the city of Las Vegas that day, but he was only able to remotely deactivate 59 of them, and another 9 were shot down successfully by the laser cannons already atop the Lucky 38 and Hoover Dam intake towers. The other 9 warheads, however, made it through, and while none touched the city directly, enough damage had indeed been done to surrounding areas to eventually cleanse the entire city of all human life, while Mr. House continued to desperately try and maintain control over his many systems, still running the inferior Mark I OS. Without the Platinum chip, though, which would have arrived on time if not for a miscalculation on House's part by mere hours, he was relying on outdated software. And so, both during the Great War and in the first several decades which followed it, House endured numerous system crashes and was constantly battling with inefficient systems within the older inferior OS. All of this strain left the now preserved man deep inside of his casino in a coma he would remain in for 61 years, well past the lifespan of any humans who had lived before the Great War now, but really, he was just getting started. But although the pre-war population of Vegas had been all but wiped out, humanity had endured. And so during those decades that Mr. House spent in a coma, humans did indeed begin to slowly resettle the city, which had miraculously survived the apocalypse. But no longer were they civilized. These new people were distinctly tribal. By 2138, House had awoken from his coma and began to observe through his connections to various systems across Vegas the tribals as they made the city their home. But House did not immediately make his presence known, instead keeping his enormous army of Securitrons deep within the Lucky 38 a secret, as he waited for the perfect moment to reveal himself and begin to make his play. And Robert House was patient. Very, very patient. Another 136 years passed by for Mr. House. The former city of Las Vegas would be long picked clean by scavengers, tribals, and raiders, but few had taken interest in things like the Las Vegas Strip and its many casinos full of slot machines and other such equipment. The people had only ever been interested in what the city could offer someone seeking survival. Mr. House, on the other hand, had always been enthralled by Vegas in a different way, and so his patience in preparing his master plan would not be for nothing, as he prepared to bring Vegas back to its full former glory. He would learn about the state of various parts of the world through his connections to systems across the city, and by unknown means, perhaps using isolated Securitron envoys, he would begin hiring salvage teams of mercenaries to comb through the ruins of Sunnyvale in hopes of finally locating the Platinum chip. But for a long time, he would have absolutely no success. But in 2274, Mr. House had detected the presence of a new tribe of humanity making their push further and further east. Scouts belonging to a new nation, the New California Republic, began arriving at Hoover Dam that year, prompting House to finally begin his master plan. And so, hundreds and hundreds of Securitrons emerged from the previously silent and completely locked Lucky 38 Hotel. Using the Securitrons as both an army and as vessels for his physical presence, House made himself known, and through threat of destruction, convinced 3 of the more powerful raider tribes living in Las Vegas to cooperate with him and help to rebuild the city in preparation for the NCR's full army. And so 3 raider tribes were reorganized into the Chairmen, the Omertas, and the White Glove Society, with the groups known as the Kings and the Great Khans both resisting House's offer to work with him, but being wise enough to also back down and resettle, the Kings eventually taking over the territory that would become Freeside, north of the Strip, and the Khans taking Bitter Springs east of the city. Within just a year, House and his new subservient tribals had established the free economic zone of New Vegas, and when the NCR's army finally did arrive, he sent Securitron envoys to meet with them and parlay for the city's place as his personal domain. Now able to at least create a nuisance for the NCR, should they be primarily interested in violent conquest. Well, while violent conquest was probably at least considered by some people within the NCR's military, their opinions would be drowned out by more reasonable ones looking to make a deal. And so the NCR signed the New Vegas Treaty with Mr. House. They would be allowed to send 95% of Hoover Dam's electrical output back to their own territory, and be allowed to garrison the former McCarran International Airport, converting it into a military base. They would also be allowed to build an embassy on the New Vegas Strip, but in exchange for all of this, Mr. House would remain the owner and sole proprietor of the city, and primarily the Strip, which would see an incredible boom in tourism following the treaty as people from across the vast NCR flocked to the pre-war jewel of the desert to do just as the people had done there hundreds of years prior, gamble their lives away. But hey, what happens in New Vegas stays in New Vegas. But the NCR wasn't the only established society in this part of post-war America. Another society had arisen over the last several decades in the East, a vast army of slaves modeled after an even older society that was ancient even to the pre-war world. By 2275, Caesar's legion had arrived on the other side of the Colorado River, and much like the NCR had likely first envisioned Vegas as a potential capital or seat of power in their developing society, the Legion, and more specifically its eponymous leader, Caesar, had every intention of claiming this pre-war prize. Unlike the NCR though, the Legion was 100% committed to violent conquest. The NCR likely would have attempted to take the city by force themselves eventually, but the arrival of the Legion meant that war was now inevitable, possibly on 2 different fronts. And so the stage was set for the first battle of Hoover Dam. Throughout all of this, Mr. House has never lost sight of his goal, to finally retrieve the Platinum Chip and upgrade his OS, as well as that of his Securitron army. This would give him the muscle power that he would need to establish full, dominant control over Vegas without having to cater to the NCR, as well as prepare him for the next stages in his multi-layered, 100-year-long ambitious plan, which remained known only to him. But Mr. House would also actively begin seeking a physical vessel to aid in his day-to-day interactions, who was not an intimidating 9-foot-tall robot with machine guns for hands. And so House looked to one of the 3 tribes he'd tamed and began to slowly teach their leader how to be as useful to him as possible. That man's name was Benny. And then, after 204 years of searching, the Platinum Chip was finally found. Ever since revealing himself, House had been spending hundreds of thousands of the Wasteland's new currency, bottle caps, to try and locate the chip. And when he finally did, now being aware of forces like the NCR, Legion, and even the Brotherhood of Steel, he spared no expense in trying to have it delivered to the Strip in absolute secrecy. 6 different couriers were hired. Their routes were screened ahead of time by mercenary groups, and only one of the 6 was actually carrying the chip, with the other 5 serving as decoys. And yes, I was one of them. This video, and all videos on my channel, are brought to you in large part by the wonderful support of my patrons on patreon.com. An extra special thank you to my executive producer and Walkerville tier patrons, Ezra Hambrick, Mason Collin, Chuck K45, King GTA 15, Diecastinator, and Michael Vandenberg. Patrons at these tiers also have the option to promote a little bit of their own content, so this video is also brought to you in part by Ezra's Let's Play channel, Scott Games 99, Mason Collins' podcast channel, We're About Everything, Chuck K45's Upstart Farming channel, and Diecastinator's channel, All About Diecast Cars. I release all videos a little early for patrons and completely uncensored, and give you access to any of the original music tracks created for a given video. You'll also get to see your name in the credits of all videos produced while you're pledged, get access to a small patron-only Discord where you can easily speak with me or see little behind-the-scenes snippets. And you'll also receive my eternal gratitude. Seriously, especially these days, those of you who support my work directly are absolutely incredible, and I can't properly express how grateful I am to all of you. Patreon.com/thecriminalhistorian. Thank you so much for watching.